so you guys know, really, this is about you guys and your community. I'm going to say just a few introductory remarks, introduce you, and I'll start asking some questions. But I want you to feel like this is a conversation that I would like to see you get into, express your thoughts, your views, your concerns, and we're going to keep track of. I'll ask you some questions to keep the conversation going. And we will keep an eye on questions that are sent in the chat box, and I may say, pick them up and ask them to you. So that's kind of the format here. We'll have about an hour, and the goal really is, as we meant it in terms of how we promoted this, it's for us to listen and learn from you guys, and truly understand how the community can be of support.
Thank you so much, Wael. First of all, I want to thank you and your team for taking this initiative and centering Afghan American voices. I think that shows leadership and vision on your part and part of the organization. And so I know you had endorsed Nadia, I believe, when she ran for office. So you have a relationship there with Nadia, and Frishta. I think your team from the New York, New Jersey area knows Frishta as well. So we really appreciate your partnership on this, and we continue to we appreciate your partnership. I know you've signed our letters before, and so thank you so much.
No, thank you, everyone, and we'll start, and we'll formally introduce you guys. Yeah, and technically, we have our bona fide in terms of supporting the Afghan American community with our early endorsement in 2017. I think it was.
You did.
Nadia's. So there you go. Okay, Iman, should we get started?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Well, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Good evening. I am Wael Zayat, CEO of Emgage and Emgage Action, a Muslim national civic and political organization. It's so wonderful to have you tonight to really listen and learn from our Afghan American community about what just happened in Afghanistan. But before that, I would like to just take a moment of silence to commemorate Ashura, which is the 10th of Muharram and the first month of the Islamic lunar calendar, honoring obviously the sacrifice of Imam Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet, and marking the saving of Moses out of Egypt. So we will pause just for a few seconds. Thank you very much. We have all seen the images on TV, online, following the what seemed to be the sudden U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan after 20 years. Taliban fighters overtaking provincial capitals and then eventually Kabul on August 15th. To describe the situation as surreal would be an understatement. There are reports of desperate people trying to get to the airport to leave the country. Many are being denied getting to the airplanes that will take them to safety. In many cases, there are no airplanes to take them to safety. Many of the countries, including and especially the United States, that worked with many of these Afghans and their families, simply has not given us good answers regarding what their fate will be. Other European countries are scrambling to also figure a way to get, whether it was translators, cultural advisors, associates, anybody who contacted with them in support of their missions out of there. But the story doesn't end there. It's not just about translators. It is about the entire country. What's going to happen to the country of 38 million people, men, women, and children, irrespective of their ethnic and religious identity, but especially the minorities? What is happening on the ground right now? Are the Taliban the same as those who once ruled 21 years ago? What's the responsibility of the international community, and especially the United States? How should the Muslim American community react, respond? How should we feel about what's happening? Well, as someone who has worked on various difficult countries in my previous career, I can tell you that one of the most important things to do is actually listen to the people who are closest to the pain and who are being impacted. This is why it's such an honor to invite our friends from the Afghan American Foundation and the Women for Afghan Women. I have Frishta Taib, who is an advocate and a leader of refugee interventionist program at the Cornerstone Family and Marriage Intervention. Nadia Hashimi is a public speaker, a pediatrician, an international best-selling novelist, and a former candidate for US Congress. And I would note an Emgage endorsee, and we were very proud to know her and support her candidacy back then. Haris Sareen is known to many of you guys, including those who work in the federal government and our community. He's an author and senior policy advisor at DHS, Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. Really, we are all here to listen to you guys and to understand from you how you see the situation on the ground, how we got here, and where do we go from here? How can we be true allies to the Afghan American community? Obviously, you represent a segment of your community. We will not claim that you speak for everyone, neither does Emgage speak for the entire Muslim American community. But with that said, Haris, I really want to just begin with you. If you can just level set a little bit and explain to us the current situation on the ground. What is happening and what are the key takeaways that you've seen so far?
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. First of all, I wanted to thank Emgage National for hosting us and having this conversation with us. As you mentioned, centering Afghan American voices and those individuals who are in direct contact and close to what is happening in this tragic situation is of utmost importance. And so we thank you and Emgage for your leadership and willing to host this conversation. In terms of what is happening on the ground, let me take one quick step back and just kind of put in context the background of how the US engaged in Afghanistan and how and why it matters to American Muslims, and then this tragic situation that we're currently experiencing. As you know, it'll be 20 years in terms of the anniversary of 9/11 this coming September. And when 9/11 happened, 9/11 happened by a group of individuals who were unfortunately at that point found a safe haven in Afghanistan. And the Taliban had sheltered Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan at that point. When 9/11 happened, it impacted the American Muslim community most acutely. Our community's rights were impacted. We had things like the Patriot Act that happened, an extreme rise in Islamophobia, the rhetoric against American Muslim communities, Arab Americans, South Asian Americans. Our communities were impacted. Many of us on this call today chose the careers we chose, are in this field because of what happened on 9/11. Our families were impacted, our institutions were impacted, and all of that came from a group that was sheltered by the Taliban, unfortunately. And then we saw, of course, the US intervention in Afghanistan in the past 20 years. In the past 20 years, we've seen multiple mistakes made not only by us in the US in Afghanistan, but also by the Afghan government, whether it was the previous president or the one that just escaped and left Afghanistan. We saw multiple mistakes made. We saw mistakes made by the international community in how we actually engaged Afghanistan and Afghans and who we empowered. We empowered some of the wrong people. We empowered some of the most corrupt people, and we engaged them. But at the same time, we also gave hope to some Afghans. Afghanistan in 1996 was completely decimated after 25 years of war. the major capital, the major cities, the capital, the provinces were completely decimated. And after 2001, after international investment, much of Afghanistan was slowly being built. There was hope for women who had suffered immensely under the Taliban. Religious minorities like the Shia community, the Sikh community, so many other communities who were impacted by the kind of regressive policies of the Taliban were all had some hope after 9/11 and did see a level of freedom. We saw the rise in women's education. More women were attending university than men were. We saw entrepreneurship amongst women. We saw an increase in freedom of press. So there was, of course, the negative impact of the intervention, the military force, many deaths, but at the same time, we saw hope and we saw success in the lives and the daily lives of people. So that's just a bit of context. As a result of the many mistakes that we made, but also the Afghan government made as well, and regional players. Let's not forget that there were many regional players, unfortunately, who also impacted the story of Afghanistan and the story of the Afghan people. After 20 years, we saw that the Taliban continued to gain strength because of regional support and because of some of the mistakes that we made. And then we, in 2017, decided that we were going to engage the Taliban directly and to really sit down with what we called a peace process and try to bring together, pull our troops out, develop a peace process, have an inclusive government, and move from there. Unfortunately, in that process, in that peace process, what we did was we empowered the Taliban to an extent where they started to get international legitimacy without actually proving that they had changed, without actually proving that they were inclusive, without actually proving that they were willing to sit with the rest of the Afghan population and actually sit down for a settlement. And what we did was we also weakened the international community, weakened the Afghan military government and institutions by not having the Taliban engage directly with the Afghan government and people, but only with us and the international community. And so over the past 2 to 3 years, we saw that rise in Taliban legitimacy on the international stage and the weakening of the Afghan government and institutions as well. And that created this perfect storm of when we decided to pull out and pull out really without any conditions. It created this perfect storm for the Taliban to be able to take many of the provinces. And then we also created a political storm where, because we didn't set any conditions to the withdrawal, we allowed for both a political, a military, and social decay to happen, which allowed the Taliban to take over the provinces and eventually the capital when the president fled, unfortunately, with his team, and it left a power vacuum, and the Taliban were able to fill it. So we are currently in this stage. We hear a lot from Kabul and the airport, but we don't hear much from the provinces. You said there's 38 million people in Afghanistan. Millions of people around the country are suffering, and there's no spotlight in media in other provinces. There's information blackouts in the southern, eastern, and western parts of Afghanistan. And so we don't know what people in the provinces are going through. So we've created this really perfect storm after our unconditional pullout, and it has really put the people of Afghanistan, forget the politics and the government, put that aside, in the Taliban. The people of Afghanistan, after 20 years of hope, of maybe building democracy, of building a representative government, of having rights, it has really put them in an extremely difficult situation. And you've seen the horrific pictures of people trying to leave because they are uncertain. People don't know who the Taliban are anymore. You know, some people are saying that the Taliban have changed. If they have changed, people don't know that. People have seen the Taliban impose a war on them for the past 20 years. And that war has killed over 250,000 people. And so have killed you for all of these years, have now said that we've changed, that's going to take time. We're going to have to see how that has happened and if that change is a reality. But people are scared, people are fearful, and it's the responsibility of the international community to really help.
Thank you so much, Harris, for that really great backgrounder, as well as kind of a recap of how at least the events that led here and where we are today. And I really am going to try to dig as deep as I can with all of you, so you could help us all just understand what is happening and help us be, good allies to you and your community, right? I'll tell you this, as a Syrian American, I go crazy whenever I see on Twitter how people comment about what's happening in Syria. So I can only imagine how you must feel when you're seeing that all of a sudden everyone has become an expert on Afghanistan and its people, and everybody wants to defend its women, right? So, but there are some real legitimate concerns, obviously, regarding what just happened. And I want to turn to you, perhaps, Nadia, to just help us understand a little bit. We all know what the Taliban did when they were in power, how they treated women. Can't go to school, can't work. They brutalized women who were just not dressed appropriately. And there's a long litany and list of offenses that continued even during the conflict with the US, where they targeted, female schools, little girls who were trying to go and get an education were gunned down, and some other atrocities. But now what we're seeing, some are saying, well, look, they have learned, they are working with, the Pakistani government and the Qatari government, and they're trying to kind of project a different image. And others are saying, well, if you just look outside of Kabul, you're seeing a different picture of what's happening. What's your take on this situation? And how should we, I'll tell you this, as a head of Emgage, I really struggled a little bit. I wanted to be as fair-minded as possible, but as realistic as possible, and not to spread fear and chaos among folks, and be just intellectually honest about it. How do we be intellectually honest about it while we are as hopeful as we can, as realistic as we can on this very important issue? This is our issue before it's any other religion or community's issue. It's a Muslim American issue for us, and how we can be of support to the people there.
Sure. And I appreciate the space to have this conversation and a chance to talk about women in particular, who are going to be at the forefront of the casualties of this next stage, whatever it's going to be. I think, it might sound great that the Taliban were able to work with the, several other governments of other countries, but it would have been even better if they would have been able to sit down with the government of the country that they believe that they're the authority of, and work with that government, that existing government that had an infrastructure, that had roles and responsibilities to its people. And as imperfect as it was a structure. And, right at this moment, I think a lot of people across the country in Afghanistan, the women that I'm hearing from who are within the country, who have been working in the space of advancing women's rights, are really concerned because there are a lot of question marks. The information that they have to go on is the historic existence that they had, the lives that they lived under the Taliban regime from 96 to 01. That is all they have to go on. Because when the Taliban were pressed during these talks in Doha and in elsewhere to talk about, to clarify, to articulate where they stood on the issue of women's rights, they're very vague, they're very non-specific, and only say that they will allow whatever is allowed within Islamic law, in accordance with Islamic law. Well, we've seen their interpretation of Islamic law, and it's been extremely toxic, their ideology in its regard towards women. So when you're taking a look at history, and you've got a generation that grew up, the young people in Afghanistan, which is the largest chunk of the demographics, these are people who have really worked to build the country. It's a very optimistic, hopeful generation. There are women who have become entrepreneurs. There are 2,500 registered entrepreneurs in the country. There's a Ministry of Women's Affairs. There are women journalists, women athletes, women artists, women who are fashion designers. There are beauty salons. There was in every sphere of the public, you had the presence, the visibility of women. And so while the Taliban might claim that they're going to respect women's rights in their regime, we have yet to see how exactly that's going to play out. And when we look at who the Taliban are now, they have not brought any women to their negotiating table. They don't have any female representation. We don't see any women in any of the photographs that come out from the body of the Taliban. So where are these people? How are they so open to representation of women and involvement of women if we don't see anyone from their side? I think that right now, Kabul, as bad as it is in a honeymoon period. And the Taliban know that all the eyes of the world are upon them. They are on, outwardly on their best behavior. We're hearing far worse reports coming from women who have connections with others in the provinces where they're describing life as a prison all of a sudden. And that's not to say that the women have capitulated and that they're giving up. They are resisting, they are showing up again, they are appearing at universities even if they're getting turned away, they are showing up at their workforces even if they're getting turned away. They are actually protesting in the street in Kabul, holding up signs just feet away from the Taliban. And that level of bravery, as much as I rejoice in it, I celebrate it, I'm also concerned for them. And I think that we're asking too much of women in Afghanistan to be a bottomless pit of inspiration and resistance.
I saw, somebody comment that, no, it's not the Taliban who have changed. It's Afghanistan that has changed in the last 20 years. That has happened, that has now produced a generation that's willing to protest against what just happened and to convey their fears irrespective of the danger that's involved in doing that. And you spoke about the generation of now journalists, entrepreneurs, and public figures, artists that have begun to finally thrive, even as Afghanistan endures the conflict that it has for the last 20 years. A lot of folks are also concerned about the fate of those who are trying to get out. But I don't want us to forget about the people who want to stay in. People who can't leave, people who have no shot at leaving, even if, and I don't think that number is even going to be possible anytime soon, but even if 100,000 somehow get picked up and sent to another country, that means that 38,900,000 people are still in the country. What are the prospects for them? And this is an open question to any of you. You think in terms of just continuing to, at a minimum, provide for themselves and their families? What are the economic conditions likely to be? What are some of the things that might be now put into motion because of what just happened? I was reading a little bit about the IMF loan that's been suspended for now, $600 million that were supposed to go to the country. A question about their access to their own reserves. Obviously, businesses have shut down. What is the situation that you're hearing about right now, or that you think is going to unfold in the coming weeks and months if nothing changed, if just what we're seeing continues? And this is open to any of you.
I'll add a few comments. I do want to apologize to everyone that I do have to log off in a few minutes for another meeting. But, I think concerns around finances are very valid. We've already seen that in some areas, specifically in Kabul, that the banks at times, and it's hard to know minute to minute what the status is, but have been depleted of cash and have been shut down. So making sure that we have some financial channels that are open is going to be really important before this, catastrophic collapse of the country, even leading up to this moment. International nonprofits and organizations that had a footprint in Afghanistan were starting to see a real shrinkage in the amount of funding that was coming to them because there was concern over from donors about what the security condition was going to look like. And so right now we've got sort of this outpouring of goodwill, but I don't know how long that's going to last, and I don't know if there's going to be the channels that are needed in place in order for that international community's outpouring to be able to get to the right people and the right organizations on the ground. The other issue is going to be, what are the Taliban allowing? We're going to need continuous oversight and accountability. Are they guaranteeing? Are they really going to allow people to have their very, very basic human rights? Are they going to allow people to communicate? Or are they going to continue to shut things down, province by province, and ultimately kind of close in on the communications of the capital as well? So I think they're banking on its short attention span and the narrowed bandwidth that the world has. And in a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, I think we're going to see a lot of differences in what's happening in Afghanistan. what we hear of. We may not even hear of everything that's happening.
Thank you, Nadia. Frishta, I'm gonna turn to you regarding the question of refugees and asylum seekers. I read somewhere that there's at least 80,000 that directly worked with the U.S. and coalition partners, them and their families. But what's your estimation of the amount of people who really need to get out of the country? I mean, just if you were to just give us a guess and then just take us through the process of what currently they may have to go through, what is going to be required to actually get them out of there?
Sure. Thank you so much, Wael, for giving us this space to really speak on Afghanistan and on the issues that we're currently facing. Just to give you a little bit of a background, I'm also, besides my intervention work, I'm also doing interpretation for evacuees currently, and pretty much round the clock, as many clients as I could possibly get, in partnership with the International Rescue Assistance Program, that's IRAP. And they have set up an emergency system in which they're trying to get SIVs out of the country. Some of the challenges that we face are, the number one challenge that we face is that because all of these companies have already left Afghanistan, there is a lack of communication between these people who are trying to receive the things that are required of them. For example, they need a letter of recommendation from the company that they worked for. They need an HR letter. And what's happening is, because they're not able to get the proper information, they might have one piece out of the three things that they need, or the two things that they need. And what ends up happening is their cases are being denied. That's one huge issue that we're seeing. Also, we're seeing that there's a lot of people who were affiliated, not necessarily SIVs, but people who are doing just as important work that fall under the category of P2, but are also having similar challenges. We're also seeing that people on the ground that have also already been given this green flag to go ahead and go to the airport are facing many, many issues. They're trying on the way to get to the airport, they're facing Taliban checkpoints. To go back to the earlier point of have these people changed? We do have reports that people are being stopped, people's cell phones are being taken. If there's any passports that they find that the person is affiliated with anybody in the United States, the passports are being confiscated. There are people who are being shot. There are people who are being killed on their way to the airport. These things are not reported so much in the mainstream media, but I am hearing from them directly on the grounds from people that I am interpreting for. I also heard from a case that I really wanted to share, that was two brothers who did receive the acceptance and were on their way to go to the airport. There were two brothers, SIVs, and one of them did not make it past the checkpoint. And unfortunately, the other one did. So there's a great challenge. I can't give you a specific number as to how many, but I can tell you that there are multiple organizations out there. If you visit our website at www.afghanamericans.org, we do have a list of resources out there, who to donate to, how you can raise awareness. And of course, the next step, which is what I'm dealing with here in the United States of America, how to resettle all of these refugees. And our number one issue that we have here now is the housing crisis. We are having a lot of problems finding housing for the groups of people that are coming to the United States.
Yeah, and obviously that coinciding with the COVID crisis and the rapid rise, well, that we've been experiencing for a while, but now especially of housing, is obviously making it that much more difficult. Now, if there's a lot of well-meaning calls right now on Congress and the administration to do something, right? And beyond our military sending planes back to Kabul International Airport, I hear some organizations, very well-meaning foundations, chartering airplanes to go out there. Well, it's going to be needed to really put a dent into this problem. If somebody can walk me through the various, logistical things that need to happen. I heard things now about people being prevented from getting to the airport, checkpoints. I heard the French, for example, have deployed their special police inside Kabul to pluck people and if need be, get through Taliban checkpoints and get them out of the country. There is a need, obviously, to figure out the vetting piece where you obviously cannot interview and ascertain the identity and the background of people right there. You take them somewhere else, do that, and then take them to. So can somebody just educate us on the steps and where in some of those areas where you think we as advocates and advocacy organizations can also push for whatever that X is?
Right. So, what I'll do is I'll walk through those steps, Wael, but I will also talk about the 38 million people who will not be able to leave. Right.
Yes.
So I think it's so important because our media and our conversation is focused, maybe like you mentioned, on at most the 100,000 that could probably leave. But the 38 million Afghans across the country will not be able to leave. So I'll go through the steps of people leaving, but at the same time, how Congress can potentially help those who continue to stay in Afghanistan and try to live under this new Taliban regime. In terms of the refugees, the asylum seekers, as you know, not everyone who worked in Afghanistan to establish a democracy, to help in establishing a new society, worked for the military. There was only a very specific group of Afghans who were interpreters and who helped with the U.S. military or NATO, our NATO allies, and those what we call the special immigrant visas, the SIV visas, and they generally have the priority to get out because they might have threats against their lives. And then they are able to get to a safe location and be processed to come to the United States. There are other folks who, over the past 20 years, who have worked to help build a very diverse and democratic nation, although fledgling and struggling. But the attempt was to build a diverse, and because as you have to remember, Afghanistan is an extremely diverse nation, ethnically and religiously. And that's something that a lot of people don't fully comprehend. Afghans have multiple ethnic communities, multiple faith communities. And so to get a representative government in the past 20 years was extremely difficult. So you had people who worked for international NGOs, human rights organizations, women's rights organizations, international financial institutions, international faith-based organizations who were doing peace building and peace work in Afghanistan. You had women who were working on issues like domestic violence. You had men who were trying to work with, trying to rehabilitate the opium trade and get farmers to stop stop producing opium and produce wheat and other crops. So you had a whole millions of people, hundreds of thousands and millions of people who didn't necessarily work for the US military or NATO forces, but who helped in building a democratic and diverse society that was open to a certain extent. Now, many of those people also fear for their lives. They don't have the direct access that interpreters might have had, the SIV folks might have had. I've been getting, the past 72 hours, the number of WhatsApp messages that I've been getting from women's rights activists, from domestic violent activists and advocates saying, I never worked for the military, but I've gotten 15 threats in the past 5 days on my life. I'm in a safe house somewhere. Can you please help me go through this process? So and advocate for in terms of what can we as communities in the US do is tell Congress and the administration to open up the categories beyond just those who directly worked with our military. to open up the P1, the P2, the asylum, the refugee categories that the various government agencies have, to lift the quotas on some of those and allow people who worked on various issues, not just military or government related issues, but who were trying to empower average Afghans to live a better life, who were working on the drug and opium trade, who were working on building a better financial and more just financial system, who were working on religious freedom for minorities, who were working on women's rights. Those individuals, right before I got on this call, I was talking to one of our partner organizations, and they were telling me that they have 1,400 women stranded all over Afghanistan who have all received threats. Why did they receive threats? Because they had women's shelters. When women they had violence against them, domestic violence, various types of violence against them, they would go to the shelters. And now there are messages being sent to them saying that these centers are brothels. And so they're under threat. Many of these women are now in safe houses, are hiding. So that is one thing that we can potentially do in terms of moving them out. And in terms of the process, as was previously mentioned, it is very hard to get to the airport, and that's only in one city in Kabul, which is a city of about 6 million people. The other 32 million people are across the country. There's no other airports open. One of the things that we're asking is for some other airports, maybe in Kandahar, in Herat, in Mazar-e-Sharif, other major cities, where some international communities can go in and say, we'll open up these airstrips and airfields and allow people who were closer to the provinces and districts to actually be processed. The other thing that can be done, and that's being thought about now, is finding third countries where people can go to and have their paperwork processed. Places like, now there's thousands of people in Qatar, there's thousands of people in Germany, there's
Guam.
Guam, there's people going to Turkey. So there's a lot of places where people can go to and potentially be processed as a third party country. So that is the process, and that's what we, a lot of focus is unfortunately around the people who served and helped the military, and I get that because, they were of service, but there's so many people who were not affiliated with the military, but who worked to build a diverse society. So that's on that end. On the second end of the 38 million people there, how do we help those people? Beyond just the politics of it, right? As you said, we want to make sure that at this point, we try to get as much help to people, regardless of who is in power at this point. The issue there is that the Afghan banking system is collapsing. So Afghanistan, as you know, is a landlocked country. Over the last 20 years, much of the even government budget was international aid. It relied on international aid. Up to 70% was international aid and funded by the international community. Now that the international community has pulled out of the capital, as you mentioned, France has actually gone to, they've evacuated their embassy and are working out of the airport. Germany, Japan, all of the other allied countries, as they have pulled out, the cash that goes into the Afghan economy has actually stopped flowing. So the banking system in Afghanistan has essentially become close to collapsing.
Our currency gets actually delivered, literally delivered inside to pay for the expenses of the previous Afghan government.
Exactly. So, the printing is not done at the local level, right? So that currency is actually delivered. There's trucks and planes that deliver the currency, and that currency is going to be stopped. So what can be done is what we can tell Congress and the administration and say, have some level, try to secure the capital enough where you have some level of security where the full financial and economic system does not come to collapse. You're going to have to work with the Taliban at some level. You're going to have to work with local organizations, ensure that there's a level of safety and security, allow some of that cash to continue if it's legal and it's possible, and make sure that you're securing guarantees from the Taliban and the local community. The other thing is to tell the international community to probably not fully evacuate their embassies and their diplomatic staff. Because once that staff is completely evacuated, then there's no ability for the local staff to work with the authorities and whoever may be in charge to provide services, to provide finances, and to also then secure the rights of the people that we've talked about within the past half an hour. So those are some of the things that we can tell Congress and the administration to do, is now that we've pulled out, how do we soften that blow and allow for some of the services which were really internationally relied upon to continue after the pullout?
Thank you so much for that, Harris. Frishta, I don't know if you have anything to add to that subject before.
Sure.
I'm gonna ask a few questions I'm seeing here coming in the comments, but I want to give you an opportunity to just comment on what you just heard.
Sure. Just to add one quick thing, I saw that there was a few comments in here about why these particular areas, and it's important to understand the process of humanitarian parole as well. It's when people are held in a certain area until their case is processed. So that's one thing I wanted to add. The second thing that I wanted to add was a little bit more of the personal accounts. With regards to earlier, we were talking about how do we know that the Taliban is doing this, and how do we know that they're going to continue to do this, right? So we do know, because currently I have people that I've, again, spoken to on the grounds who have eyewitness accounts that the Taliban are going from door to door, from building to building, and doing their own type of census. They're asking for lists, and in certain areas, if there's an apartment building, they're asking to talk to the security in the front. They want to know in each apartment how many people are living there, how many girls are there, how many of the girls are over the age of 12. And if so, are there any journalists that are here? So they are instilling a lot of what we've seen in the last 20 years. That's one thing that we've seen, eyewitness account. They've also raided any women's organizations and offices. They've raided them. They've actually taken papers, and now they're looking for staffers, right? So they're looking for locals who have helped any, like Odishan said earlier, looking for people who have assisted in these plans, but they actually have information, they have names, they have addresses, and they're hunting people down. So that's the reality of the situation. This is not something that's going to be shown in mainstream media, but I really want to make it clear to everybody who's watching today that this is already started to happen. I know personally of another client of mine whose daughter is a medical student. He pulled her out of medical school, and they've created these basement, like in the times of the Holocaust, where they would hide the Jewish people inside of these basements. They've created these types of safe zones in Afghanistan, and they're hiding their daughters and their girls in these types of underground areas so that when the Taliban come in and raid their homes, they won't be taking their girls.
That's just awful to contemplate. I'm gonna just ask you guys some of the questions I'm seeing here in the comments section, and feel free to chime in, either one of you. So folks are asking about a possible resistance forming in the northern part of the country by Ahmed Massoud and others, and is the U.S. going to support them? I really don't want to make the conversation about geopolitics and all that, but just is there, what do you make of some of those things that you're hearing about that? Go and Harris, you're on mute.
My apologies, White.
Okay.
What I would say to folks who are now talking about the resistance is, let's just take a step back. Yeah. We're going to see how things will unfold in the next week to 2 weeks to a month. We still don't know what is happening on the ground. As you have seen, as was mentioned by Nadia, the Taliban have been quite careful in terms of how they're portraying their public image and the statements that they're making, and even the steps that they're taking in terms of declaration of governance and leadership, and also an inclusive government or an exclusive government. Much is on hold at this point. And I think there's a lot of negotiating happening in Doha and in Kabul and in Kandahar. So I would ask folks just to take a step back. There is a resistance that is forming in the Panjshir Valley in Afghanistan, but it is very small. But at the same time, they're still talking to folks. They have not fully taken up arms. They have not started a resistant front as of yet. What I would tell people is Afghanistan has gone through 40 years of war without an interruption at all. And people, and part of the challenge in all of this is when we talk about, Nadia mentioned that women are resisting, people are resisting, people are resilient. What I hear from a lot of people, I've been talking to people on the ground now for the past 4 to 5 days, nonstop. What I'm hearing from people is people are just tired. The Afghan people are tired of resisting. The Afghan people are tired of being resilient. We have had a generation or 2 generations and 3 generations now of war imposed by outsiders upon the Afghan people. And the Afghan people want a level of security and safety and peace. And so right now, what I would tell people is take a step back. Allow for the process. There are things happening on the ground. There's processes being played out in Doha and Kabul and other places. The 20 foreign ministers of NATO are meeting immediately to discuss the situation on tomorrow or Saturday. The UN Security Council is meeting as well. There is a lot happening. And I would just tell people to take a step back, listen, but at the same time, don't make any judgment as of yet. At the same time, do not start the normalization process of a brutal regime. And you know this, and we've talked about this when it comes to the Syrian issue, Wael. In 2011, when the conflict in Syria started, and then it continued, the people got tired, and then there was a normalization of the Assad tyranny that started to take place by a lot of people. Allow for this to play out. Don't normalize the Taliban right away. Hold them accountable. Allow the international community and eyes to hold them accountable. Don't say, oh, just because a few days of no war that has taken place inside of Kabul, no assassinations, no suicide bombings, but it was the Taliban who was imposing that on the Afghan people to begin with. So yeah, they've stopped because now they have obtained ultimate victory, but allow for this process to play out. And one of the things as an Afghan American that I'm seeing that really hurts me, and I'll be very, very honest in terms of our engagement and part of the Muslim American community, is that this normalization has to a certain extent started. Without
What does it look like? How are you seeing that happen?
I've seen it happen in multiple ways. Number one, I've seen it happen where religious figures talk about this idea of believers being triumphant over the infidels and over the invading forces. This is not a black and white issue. The Afghans who the Taliban were fighting were also Muslims. They were also fighting people who went to mosques and prayed and believed, and who went to Hajj and who actually believed in God. This is not a clear black and white bifurcation. So people need to pull back the rhetoric. The one other thing that we're seeing is that people are saying, oh, well, now the Taliban have brought some safety. There's some safety in Kabul. Yes, there's some safety, some relative calm in Kabul right now. Why is that? That's because the people who were doing the assassinations, the suicide bombings, the killings have stopped because now they're in control of Kabul. So that is the type of rhetoric that we're seeing online, that we're seeing on social media. What needs to happen is that people need to take a step back, allow for this to play out, ensure that the Taliban prove that they have changed if they actually have, and support initiatives and people who have helped build a democratic society over the past 20 years. While I'll tell you, in that region, Afghanistan, according to freedom of expression and press freedom indexes, Afghanistan had the most free press of any state in that region, Central South Asia. it was a very vibrant, expressive society, both in the media and arts, and people were doing it based on their culture and based on identity and faith. It wasn't a foreign imposed media. It was organic to Afghanistan. And so for those things to continue, to ensuring that the Taliban allow people to continue to express themselves, to engage, and how to express themselves is extremely.
Sorry, my connection got bad for a bit, hence my pause. The more you guys are saying, the more questions are coming in, which is typical. But I want to ask you about a very important piece about organizations to support. People keep typing in that. So organizations that are doing good work, that you feel, there's a lot of well-meaning people out here, alhamdulillah. So they want to do something, they want to help. Do you have, I know that Frishta, you gave us your organization's link and I actually typed it. Was it afghanamericans.org, right?
Yes.
And you have a list of other places where people can go and channel their goodwill. What are the types of things that you think are most important right now for people to support? Let's say financially, if they want to send a donation, what should that go towards?
So there's a few different things here. The first thing is that the list that we have on our website are reputable organizations. Unfortunately, there is what happens anytime there's crisis is that everybody kind of stands up and tries to fundraise. Remember that it's very important right now to get money over. Western Union has shut down, right? It's very important for resources to be gotten to the place where they need to. So there's very specific places that we encourage you to donate. And again, you can find that list on our website. What you can do internally here in the United States of America, which I highly encourage, is get in touch with these resettlement agencies. The International Rescue Committee is the largest resettlement agency in the United States of America. And here in the tri-state area, we've been having conversations with them. And besides the housing, there's going to be a great deal of things that will be needed. Volunteers will be needed to drive people to schools, right, to register children. September is around the corner, and we anticipate that in the next 10 to 14 days, there's going to be a huge wave of refugees from Afghanistan and SIVs coming over. So those are some of the things we can do. There are other Lutheran Social Services is a very big organization in Northern Virginia that people can donate to. They actually have a specific link just for Afghanistan. Catholic Charities also has a huge project that they're working on to resettle Afghans. There's going to be household items that are going to be needed. Microwaves, there's going to be school supplies that will be needed. Again, I encourage you to look at our list, find the resettlement agency, and get in contact with the volunteer coordinators.
Okay. And specifically, if folks want to sponsor a family, for example, is that possible? How do they do that?
So there is an organization, Muslim Aid USA, that has a orphan, you can sponsor an orphan from Afghanistan. I've spoken to the executive director there. They are working on a project to safely be able to still resource. They are very transparent and saying it's getting very difficult, but they're still working hard to try to find a way to get past some of the challenges that they're facing right now. So again, I would reach out to Muslim Aid USA for Afghan
Thank
orphans.
you so much for that. No, thank you. That's very, very helpful. And obviously, there's no way we're going to cover this topic in 1 hour. I want to have this be an open conversation on this. This is going to be an ongoing conversation because it's an ongoing situation on the ground that's going to be with us for months and years. And so my invitation to you guys and your community and other organizations is to have this dialogue, to inform the Muslim American community regarding what's happening here in America. There are some concerns regarding the weaponization of what we're seeing by Islamophobes, right? To say, look, here we go again. here goes, extremism in Islam. The problem is Islam, and the Taliban are representatives of Islam, and look how they treat, you guys know what I'm talking about. How do we walk that line of combating this Islamophobia without doing a disservice to the Afghans who are legitimately concerned about the excesses of the Taliban? Any recommendations, or at least what we should not do or say?
That's a great question, Wael. And I'll start with a very personal story.
Yeah.
I remember the day of 9/11. I was driving. I was taking my daughter to school and preschool, and it was an Islamic preschool, and I was actually a teacher at the school. Shout out to New Horizon Pasadena. I remember that day so clearly because that was the start of the Islamophobia industry in America outwardly. There was, of course, this undercurrent in Hollywood and the media prior to 9/11, the Orientalism that existed. But outward Islamophobia started on that day. And I saw it on the faces of the children in the school. And I saw it for 20 years as I worked in the Muslim American community with MPAC and with Emgage and with all the other organizations. And I saw 20 years of American Muslims going through intense Islamophobia because of what emanated out of the Taliban regime in 2001. That is very personal, and it should be very personal for us as American Muslims, because we worked extremely hard in the past 20 years to build institutions like Emgage to fight that Islamophobia and to ensure our place in the American mosaic, right? That's going to happen again. We as Muslims have to be at the forefront of saying, this does not represent us. And we can't be shy about it. We can't be afraid that we are feeding into the Islamophobic machine. The Islamophobic machine will do what it does. It will take every single instance anywhere, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's Iran, whether it is wherever it may be, that machine will play out. What we have to do is be honest with ourselves about what our faith really means to us. And not to, as the Quran says, not to swerve from justice just because it is fellow Muslims who are committing that injustice. What we have to do is ensure that we are out in front and saying that Islam is not represented by this harsh understanding that the Taliban might have. Whether you want to give them a chance, whether you want to legitimate them, that's different. But this is not the Islam that we believe allows people to flourish, to shine, to become servants of God who benefit humanity. And I think we continue to be as clear in our calling out and condemnation of the actions that come out of the Taliban, whether they do or not. We'll allow time to figure out what it is a Taliban regime.
It's Harris that froze, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, it's okay. I'll continue until he comes back.
Please.
So basically, just to piggyback off of what Harris was saying, Afghan Americans faced the strongest, and I know that all Muslims went through a lot, but if you can for a moment think and put yourselves in our shoes, that we had the Islamophobia going on here, but we also had our country back home. That's a double trauma. And right now, Afghan Americans are being re-traumatized. We are being re-traumatized. It is August 19th. We're just a few weeks away from that 20-year anniversary. And for us to go full circle, that does something on the emotional. And, as an interventionist, I work with refugees when it comes to PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. And there's that post-traumatic stress syndrome that we're going to be dealing with very soon when these new arrivals come. But there's also the trauma of the diaspora that has to go full circle, almost back to where we began, so close to this anniversary. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of this. I know our time is limited. And the last thing that I will say is please, please, please do not forget Afghanistan and the people of Afghanistan. I know everybody is passionate right now, and we always are, right? And it's human nature in the first 1 or 2 or 3 weeks, maybe even a month. But when this starts to fall off the cover of CNN, and when this starts to come off the face of all medias that are out there, please don't forget about us. Don't forget about our plight. Don't forget about our people. And most importantly, continue to support the cause, and remember that not in our name, not in our Islam. This is not our Islam. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Frishta, for that. And I think it's appropriate to really conclude the program with those really important remarks and reminders. And our promise to you is to not forget about Afghanistan or its people. I want us to get together in a few months to see what's happening.
Absolutely.
and to assess the situation as Harris advises to do that. Welcome back, Harris. And this is a long journey. You know, we are where we are, the community from the Uyghur to the Palestinians, to the Syrians, to the Afghans. It's a low point for Muslims at the globe in some ways. But we are here for a reason in America, in the West. We have access, we have power, we have resources, we have a voice. We can be agents for good. And as a community, we really need to look after one another, community and family and brothers and sisters. So with that, I want to, Harris, I want to see if you have any last words, actually, since you went and came back. But we're about to conclude the program. I want to see if there's any final things you want to share with us.
Final, thank you so much, Wael. My apologies for getting cut off. But again, I want to thank you and Emgage for your leadership and vision, and continuing to support causes of freedom of people. And I think that's extremely important, that we stand in solidarity with each other as American Muslim communities. But what I would say is that support your Afghan American brothers and sisters right now. Be there for them emotionally, be there for them, check up on them, engage them. I have to say that, you know, I put up a post on social media, which I got a lot of feedback from, as I said that young Afghan Americans who were at the front of the causes of American Muslims, Uyghurs, Palestinians, Syrians, and other issues that are dear to many of our hearts, many of them would come to me and say, where is the Muslim community now? Why aren't we hearing from them? This is an issue our people are suffering. And I would suggest that we as American Muslims stand with each other, regardless of political differences, but allow Afghan American voices to lead, and allow those voices to really help inform the narratives and the conversations. I'm actually headed to the region now, tonight, to go work on some refugee-related issues, and to hear directly from Afghans who are just coming out of Afghanistan. The important thing for us is to center and elevate Afghan American voices, and you guys at Emgage are doing that, and so thank you so much.
Thank you so much to the both of you and to everyone who joined us. Thanks to my team for helping us put this event on. And the work really is only beginning on this issue for all of us. So let's stay in touch and let us know, please, how we can provide that help and support. Consider Emgage your organization in terms of amplification, advocacy, etc. And everyone on this call, on this meeting, we posted some resources, but feel free to reach out to us or any of the participants here for more information on how you can be of help. With that, I'm going to end the program. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.